The morning sun was already brutal at 0847 hours, turning the Eastern European countryside into a shimmering haze that made distances difficult to judge. Specialist Sophia Turner wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand and checked the ambulance's engine temperature gauge for the third time in 10 minutes. The armored M997 HMMWV ambulance was running hot, but within acceptable parameters for summer operations in the Balkans. Everything was functioning exactly as it should be, which meant Sophia had nothing to do but wait and watch the heat waves rise from the dusty road. She was 24 years old, 5'6", with dark brown hair pulled back in a regulation bun so tight it gave her headaches, and hazel eyes that constantly scanned her surroundings even when there was nothing to see but rolling hills covered in dense forest and abandoned farmland. She'd been a combat medic for 3 years, trained to provide emergency medical treatment under fire, but her current assignment was considerably less dramatic, driving an ambulance for a supply convoy moving medical equipment and personnel between NATO forward operating bases in the disputed border region. It wasn't the exciting deployment she'd imagined when she enlisted. No dramatic rescues, no combat medical interventions, just driving an ambulance through endless countryside while more experienced medics handled any actual casualties. Or, the closest she'd come to real action in 4 months was treating a soldier's twisted ankle and bandaging a mechanic's tool injury. Her ambulance was positioned fourth in a convoy of 7 vehicles, 3 supply trucks ahead of her, 2 more behind, and a Humvee with a .50 caliber machine gun at the front and rear providing security. Standard convoy configuration for moving through territory where separatist militant activity was possible, but not expected. The convoy had stopped for a scheduled maintenance check at a small fuel distribution point approximately 40 kilometers from their destination. The security teams were conducting perimeter sweeps, the drivers were checking their vehicles, and the medics assigned to Sophia's ambulance, Sergeant Mark Chen and Corporal Jessica Rodriguez, had wandered over to the distribution point's small building to refill their water supplies and use the latrine, which left Sophia alone with the ambulance, sitting in the driver's seat with the door open, trying to catch whatever breeze existed in this oppressive heat and feeling bored enough to consider her career choices. She'd joined the army to make a difference, to save lives, to be part of something larger than herself. Her father had been a paramedic who'd spent 30 years responding to emergencies, and she'd grown up hearing his stories about the people he'd helped, the lives he'd saved through quick thinking and medical skill. When he died of a heart attack during her senior year of high school, she decided to honor his memory by following in his footsteps, but doing it in uniform, serving her country while serving people who needed help. The reality had been somewhat different from her expectations. Yes, she'd received excellent medical training. Yes, she was making a difference in theory. But the past 4 months had been an endless cycle of driving, waiting, driving more, and occasionally treating minor injuries that any first-aid certified civilian could have handled. She felt like she was wasting her training, wasting her potential, wasting her time. Sophia checked her watch. The convoy commander had authorized a 15-minute maintenance stop, and they were at minute 13. Chen and Rodriguez would be back any second. They'd mount up, and the convoy would continue rolling through the countryside toward another boring day at another forward operating base where nothing interesting ever happened. She was wrong about that last part. At 0851 hours, the first RPG streaked across the road and slammed into the lead security Humvee with a detonation that turned the morning calm into instant chaos. Sophia's training took over before her conscious mind finished processing what was happening. She threw herself out of the driver's seat and onto the ground on the opposite side of the ambulance from the explosion, using the vehicle's armor as cover while her brain caught up to the situation. The lead Humvee was burning, black smoke pouring from its destroyed engine compartment. She couldn't see if anyone had survived. Then the world exploded with the sound of automatic weapons fire. Bullets cracked through the air and sparked off metal as the convoy came under attack from multiple directions. Sophia could see muzzle flashes from positions in the tree line north and east of the convoy. Separatist militants firing from concealed positions in the dense forest approximately 200 meters away. The ambush had been well planned, catching the convoy on the open road with limited cover and using the destroyed lead vehicle to pin them in place. The rear security Humvee's .50 caliber machine gun opened up with a sustained roar that was simultaneously the most frightening and most comforting sound Sophia had ever heard. The gunner was engaging targets to the north, tracers streaking toward the tree line. But there were militant fighters firing from the east as well, and the convoy was caught in a crossfire. Sophia's radio crackled with urgent transmissions. "All vehicles, contact east and north. Multiple insurgent positions. Return fire. Medic, we have casualties in the lead vehicle." That last part cut through her fear like a knife. Casualties, people who needed medical help. That was her job. She keyed her radio with shaking hands. "This is Ambulance 1. I copy casualties in lead vehicle. Where are Chen and Rodriguez?" The two medics assigned to her ambulance were the experienced ones, the ones who'd actually treated combat casualties before. She needed them. A different voice came back, strained and urgent. "Ambulance 1, both your medics are pinned down in the distribution building taking fire. They can't reach you. Lead vehicle has at least 2 casualties, possibly more. We need medical support now." Sophia felt ice form in her stomach. Chen and Rodriguez were trapped. The lead vehicle had wounded soldiers who needed immediate treatment, and she was the only medic close enough to help. She assessed the situation with forced calm that surprised her. The lead Humvee was approximately 30 meters ahead of her position. Between her ambulance and that vehicle was open ground with minimal cover. Crossing it would mean exposing herself to fire from the militant positions in the tree line. But soldiers were wounded and possibly dying in that burning vehicle, and waiting for the situation to improve meant they might not survive. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "The most important thing in emergency medicine isn't your equipment or your training. It's your willingness to go to where the patient is, even when it's difficult or dangerous." Sophia grabbed the medical aid bag from the ambulance, a large pack containing trauma supplies, bandages, medication, and everything a combat medic might need to keep someone alive until they reached a surgical facility. She also grabbed her M4 carbine, the rifle she'd qualified with but never actually expected to use in combat. The weapon felt heavier than she remembered from the range. She took 3 deep breaths, trying to calm her racing heart, then keyed her radio. "All stations, this is Ambulance 1. I'm moving to treat casualties in the lead vehicle. I need covering fire." The convoy commander's voice came back immediately. "Ambulance 1, negative. You'll be exposed to enemy fire. Wait for—" Sophia didn't wait for him to finish. She'd already made her decision. She broke from cover and ran toward the burning Humvee, the medical bag bouncing against her back, her rifle in one hand. The distance was only 30 meters, but it felt like 30 miles as bullets cracked through the air around her. She heard rounds impacting the dirt road near her feet, heard the distinctive snap of supersonic projectiles passing close enough to feel the pressure wake. She reached the lead vehicle and threw herself behind it, using the bulk of the disabled Humvee for cover. Her heart was hammering so hard she could hear it over the gunfire. She'd just run through enemy fire and somehow hadn't been hit. That realization came with a surge of adrenaline that made her hands shake. "Medics here," she shouted, announcing her presence to whoever was inside the vehicle. "How many wounded?" A voice came from inside the Humvee, tight with pain. "2 casualties. Gunners hit bad, drivers got fragmentation wounds. The rest of us are pinned down but functional." Sophia moved to the vehicle's passenger side, where she had the most protection from incoming fire. The door was damaged but still partially functional. She pulled it open and immediately assessed the situation inside. The driver, a young soldier whose name tape read Morrison, had multiple fragmentation wounds to his arms and face from the RPG strike. Painful and bleeding, but not immediately life-threatening if treated properly. The gunner, who'd been manning the .50 caliber weapon when the RPG hit, had taken the worst of the blast. He was unconscious, bleeding heavily from wounds to his chest and legs and clearly in critical condition. "I need help getting the gunner out," Sophia said to the other soldiers in the vehicle, a lieutenant and a specialist who both looked shaken but functional. "We need to get him into the ambulance where I can treat him properly." The specialist helped her pull the wounded gunner from the turret position, a process made difficult by his wounds in the confined space. As they worked, bullets continued to impact around the vehicle. The militant forces were maintaining sustained fire, and from what Sophia could hear, they were trying to maneuver closer to the convoy through the forest cover. They got the gunner out and onto the ground behind the Humvee, where Sophia immediately began trauma treatment. His wounds were severe, multiple shrapnel penetrations to his chest, likely lung damage based on his breathing sounds, and heavy bleeding from his left leg where a large fragment had severed his femoral artery. He was going to bleed out in minutes if she didn't stop it. Sophia's hands moved with efficiency she didn't know she possessed, driven by training that had been drilled into her through endless repetitions. She applied a tourniquet to the leg wound, stopping the arterial bleeding that would have killed him fastest. She inserted a needle decompression into his chest to address what she suspected was a tension pneumothorax, a collapsed lung that was preventing him from breathing properly. She established an IV line and began pushing fluids to combat shock. While she worked, bullets continued to snap overhead and impact around the vehicle. The convoy's defensive fire was intense. She could hear the .50 caliber from the rear security vehicle, M4 rifles firing from various positions, and the distinctive chatter of a SAW machine gun. But the militant fire wasn't slackening. If anything, it was intensifying. "Ambulance 1, this is actual," the convoy commander's voice came over the radio. "We have enemy forces attempting to flank from the east through the tree line. They're moving into assault positions. We need that ambulance mobile and ready to move casualties. What's your status?" Sophia keyed her radio while maintaining pressure on a bleeding wound. "Actual, I have 2 critical casualties at the lead vehicle. I need at least 5 more minutes to stabilize before transport." "We don't have 5 minutes. Enemy forces are closing through the forest. Get those casualties loaded and get back to your vehicle now." She looked at the wounded gunner, at the 4th line running life-saving fluids into his arm, at the chest seal she'd just applied over his penetrating wound. Moving him right now, before he was properly stabilized, would likely kill him. But staying here while militants maneuvered through the forest for a closer assault would get everyone killed. The specialist who'd helped her move the gunner spoke up. "Ma'am, I can carry the critical one. Morrison can walk with support, but we need to move now." Sophia made her decision. "Do it. Get them to the ambulance. I'll cover your movement." She grabbed her M4 carbine, which she'd set down while treating the wounded, and moved to a position where she could observe the eastern tree line where the militants were reportedly maneuvering. Through the summer haze and vegetation, she could see movement, armed figures using the forest cover as they advanced toward the convoy. The specialist and Morrison began moving toward the ambulance, carrying the critical casualty between them. It was slow going, but they were making progress. Sophia positioned herself to provide covering fire if needed, her rifle up and ready, despite never having fired at another human being in her entire life. One of the advancing militants emerged from the tree line to fire an RPG toward the convoy's center vehicles. Sophia saw him clearly, approximately 150 meters away, standing to take his shot in the open field between forest and road, the launcher clearly visible on his shoulder. In that instant, she understood that if that RPG hit one of the fuel trucks, the resulting explosion would likely kill multiple soldiers and destroy their chances of successful evacuation. Her rifle was already aimed in his direction. She centered the sight picture on the figure's chest, controlled her breathing the way she'd been taught on the qualification range, and squeezed the trigger. The M4 cracked, and through the sight, Sophia saw the militant fighter jerk and fall. The RPG launcher dropped unfired. She'd just shot someone, killed someone. The realization tried to overwhelm her, but she pushed it aside. There would be time to process that later. Right now, there were more threats and more wounded soldiers who needed her help. She engaged 2 more militant fighters who were attempting to move across the open ground between forest and convoy, firing controlled pairs at distances she'd never practiced on any training range. She didn't know if she hit them, but they stopped advancing and retreated into the forest. Sometimes, suppressive fire was as valuable as accurate fire. The specialist and Morrison reached the ambulance with their casualty. Sophia conducted a fighting withdrawal back to her vehicle, firing at positions where she saw muzzle flashes or movement in the tree line, using whatever cover was available. Bullets cracked around her, kicking up dirt from the road and sparking off metal, but somehow she reached the ambulance without being hit. She dove into the back of the vehicle where her casualties were already being loaded. The critical gunner was unconscious but still alive. Her trauma treatment had kept him in that condition. Morrison was wounded, but functional. The specialist who'd helped carry them was climbing into the driver's seat because Sophia needed to be in back treating casualties. "Where are Chen and Rodriguez?" Sophia asked, suddenly remembering her two fellow medics were still trapped in the distribution building. "Still pinned down," the specialist, his name tape read Jackson, replied. "The convoy commander is trying to coordinate fire to suppress enemy positions so they can reach us." As if to punctuate his words, the sound of gunfire intensified. Sophia could hear the .50 caliber machine gun maintaining sustained fire into the tree line, along with multiple rifles. Through the ambulance's small windows, she could see the distribution building where Chen and Rodriguez were trapped. Militant fighters were firing at it from positions in the northern forest, keeping the medics unable to move. The convoy commander's voice came over the radio. "All vehicles, prepare to move. We're breaking contact and withdrawing south on the main route. Ambulance, you're third in line. When I give the signal, you move fast and you don't stop until we're clear of the kill zone." Breaking contact made tactical sense. The convoy was outnumbered, taking casualties, and in danger of being overrun if they stayed in position. But it also meant abandoning Chen and Rodriguez in the distribution building, along with the personnel there. Sophia keyed her radio. "Actual, we can't leave our people in that building." "We're not leaving them, Ambulance 1. The building has supplies and defensible positions. They'll hold there until we can organize a relief force. Right now, we need to get these casualties to a surgical facility or they'll die. You've got critical wounded who need treatment we can't provide here." He was right. The gunner she'd stabilized would die without surgery to repair his internal injuries. Morrison needed proper treatment for his fragmentation wounds. Staying to fight would likely result in more casualties without the combat power to change the tactical situation. But abandoning fellow soldiers felt like a betrayal of everything she'd been taught about leaving no one behind. The decision was made for her when an RPG slammed into the fuel truck directly in front of her ambulance. The explosion was massive, the truck's fuel cargo igniting in a fireball that sent black smoke boiling into the summer sky. The shockwave rocked the ambulance, and debris rained down on the vehicle's armored roof. "Move! Move! Move!" the convoy commander shouted over the radio. "All vehicles, execute withdrawal now!" Jackson put the ambulance in gear and hit the accelerator, following the surviving vehicles as they began moving south away from the ambush site. Sophia was thrown against the side of the vehicle as it accelerated, barely maintaining her position next to the critical casualty whose IV line she was still monitoring. The convoy picked up speed, moving as fast as the damaged vehicles could manage over the paved road. Militant fire chased them, bullets sparking off armor, one round punching through the ambulance's rear door, but miraculously hitting nothing vital. The .50 caliber in the rear security vehicle was firing constantly, laying down covering fire toward the tree line to protect the convoy's withdrawal. They'd traveled maybe 200 meters when Sophia heard an explosion behind them, another RPG impact or possibly an improvised mine. Someone was shouting on the radio about casualties in one of the rear vehicles. The convoy was being chewed apart by the sustained attack. "Actual, this is trail vehicle," a strained voice came over the radio. "We're immobilized. Engine damage, can't maintain speed. We're falling behind." The convoy commander's response was immediate, but carried the weight of an impossible choice. "Trail vehicle, can you conduct self-recovery?" "Negative. Engine's dead. We're sitting ducks if we stay here." Sophia looked out the ambulance's small rear window and could see the disabled vehicle falling behind as the rest of the convoy continued moving. There were soldiers in that vehicle. If they were left behind, the militants would overrun their position within minutes. She made a decision that she knew was probably crazy but felt absolutely necessary. "Jackson, stop the ambulance." "What?" Ma'am, we're in the middle of a fighting withdrawal. We can't. That vehicle has casualties and they're about to be overrun. Stop the ambulance. Now. Jackson hesitated for maybe 2 seconds, then hit the brakes. The ambulance skidded to a stop. Sophia grabbed her M4 carbine and jumped out of the back, landing on the pavement and immediately taking cover behind the vehicle's rear. The disabled truck was maybe 50 meters behind them, stationary and taking fire from multiple militant positions advancing from the forest. Sophia could see soldiers bailing out of the truck, seeking what cover they could find in the roadside ditch, returning fire at the approaching militants. "All stations, this is Ambulance 1, Sophia transmitted on the radio, her voice remarkably steady considering she was about to do something incredibly dangerous. "I'm dismounting to provide security for the disabled vehicle and treat any casualties. I need covering fire on enemy positions in the tree line north and east." "Ambulance 1, negative," the convoy commander shouted. "You're not a combat soldier. Get back in that vehicle and—" Sophia ignored him and started moving toward the disabled truck at a combat crouch, using the roadside ditch for cover. The rear security vehicle's .50 caliber was firing over her head into the tree line, keeping militant forces from advancing too aggressively across the open ground. But she could see armed fighters approximately 100 meters away at the forest edge, moving to flank the disabled truck's position. She reached the truck and found 4 soldiers taking cover in the ditch. 2 were wounded, 1 seriously, and the other 2 were maintaining defensive fire with their M4 rifles toward the tree line. They looked shocked to see her. "Medics here," Sophia announced, already assessing the casualties. 1 soldier had taken a round through his shoulder, painful and bleeding but survivable. The other had abdominal wounds that looked far more serious. "Ma'am, what are you doing here?" one of the unwounded soldiers asked. "The convoy's leaving us." "No one's leaving anyone," Sophia replied, beginning treatment on the abdominal wound. "We're getting everyone out. How much ammunition do you have left?" "Maybe 3 magazines each. Not enough if they rush us from the forest." Sophia worked quickly, applying pressure dressings and administering medication, while bullets continued to snap overhead. The militant forces were getting closer. She could hear voices shouting from the tree line, could see muzzle flashes from positions that seemed far too near. She finished her immediate trauma treatment and grabbed her M4. "Can you carry your wounded?" "Yes, ma'am, but where are we going?" "That vehicle is dead. We're moving back to the ambulance." "It's 50 meters that way. When I start firing, you move as fast as you can with the casualties. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just get to that ambulance." The soldiers looked at her like she'd lost her mind, but they prepared to move. Sophia positioned herself where she had the best view of the tree line and began engaging targets. She wasn't trying for precision shots. She was conducting suppressive fire, forcing the enemy fighters to keep their heads down and stay in the forest while the soldiers moved. Her rifle cracked repeatedly as she fired controlled bursts at any position where she saw movement or muzzle flashes at the forest edge. She emptied 1 magazine and reloaded with movements made automatic by training, continuing her fire. Behind her, she could hear the soldiers moving with their casualties, shouting encouragement to each other. "We're at the ambulance," someone shouted. Sophia began her own withdrawal, moving backward while maintaining fire on the militant positions. She made it maybe 20 meters before the situation deteriorated further. From the tree line on her right flank, approximately 30 meters away, 3 militant fighters broke from cover and began advancing across the open field toward her position. They were close enough that she could see their faces clearly, close enough that there was no missing at this range. This wasn't suppressive fire or long-distance engagement. This was kill or be killed close combat. Her M4 came up instinctively, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought would have been too slow. She engaged the first fighter with a controlled pair, 2 rounds center mass. He went down in the grass. She transitioned to the second fighter, who was bringing his AK-47 to bear on her position. 2 more rounds. He dropped. The third fighter got off a burst that cracked past her head close enough to feel the pressure, but her return fire was faster and more accurate. 3 militant fighters down in less than 5 seconds. Sophia's hands were shaking, her heart hammering, but she was still alive and still moving. She continued her fighting withdrawal back to the ambulance, engaging targets that appeared from the forest edge, suppressing positions that threatened her route. She reached the ambulance and dove into the back, where Jackson immediately hit the accelerator. The vehicle surged forward, rejoining the convoy that had slowed to provide covering fire during the rescue operation. The ambulance's interior was now crowded with casualties. The original critical gunner she'd stabilized, Morrison with his fragmentation wounds, and the two new casualties from the disabled truck. Sophia moved between them, checking vitals, adjusting IV lines, applying fresh dressings where needed. Her hands were covered in blood, her uniform was soaked with sweat, and she was running on pure adrenaline. The convoy continued south at maximum speed, putting distance between themselves and the ambush site. The militant fire gradually diminished as they moved out of effective range, and the forest gave way to more open terrain. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, they reached a secured NATO checkpoint where a quick reaction force had deployed to provide support. Medical personnel rushed to the ambulance when it stopped, taking charge of the casualties Sophia had kept alive through the running fight. She climbed out of the vehicle on legs that felt like rubber, her rifle still in her hands, and stood in the summer heat trying to process what had just happened. A colonel approached her, the convoy commander who'd been giving orders over the radio. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Specialist Turner, what you just did was either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've seen in 20 years of service." Possibly both. Sophia didn't have the energy to respond appropriately to a senior officer. "Are my casualties going to make it, sir?" "The doctors think so, thanks to your trauma treatment and your refusal to leave anyone behind. That gunner from the lead vehicle would have died if you hadn't reached him when you did. The soldiers from the disabled truck would have been captured or killed if you hadn't gone back for them." He paused, then continued, "But you're not a combat soldier specialist. You're a medic. What you did, engaging enemy fighters, conducting a solo rescue operation, holding off an advancing force, that's not your job. With respect, sir, my job is to save lives. Sometimes that requires more than just bandages and IV lines." The colonel studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're absolutely right. Dismissed, specialist. Get yourself checked out by the medics, get some water, and try to decompress. You've earned it." Sophia walked toward the medical aid station on legs that wanted to collapse, her mind replaying the events of the past hour. She'd run through enemy fire. She'd treated critical casualties under sustained combat. She'd killed militant fighters who were trying to kill American soldiers. She'd rescued wounded personnel from an imminent overrun, and somehow, impossibly, she was still alive. A familiar voice called her name, and she turned to see Sergeant Chen and Corporal Rodriguez running toward her. They'd been extracted from the distribution building by the quick reaction force and looked worried and guilty. "Turner," Chen said when he reached her, "we heard what you did. You treated casualties under fire, went back for wounded soldiers, held off enemy forces. That's not stuff you learn in basic combat medic training." "Sure it is," Sophia replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "You learn to go where the casualties are, regardless of the danger. You learn to do whatever's necessary to keep people alive. That's exactly what combat medic training teaches." Rodriguez shook her head in amazement. "Most medics who've been in combat for years haven't done half of what you just did. How did you keep it together?" Sophia thought about the question carefully before answering. "My father was a paramedic. He told me once that in emergency medicine, you don't have time to be scared or to second-guess yourself. You just focus on the problem in front of you, the patient who needs help, the wound that needs treatment, the threat that needs addressing. You solve that problem, then move to the next one. That's what I did today. Just solved one problem at a time." "Well, whatever you did, you saved at least 6 lives today," Chen said. "The gunner from the lead vehicle is in surgery but stable. Morrison's going to be fine. The 2 soldiers from the disabled truck are both going to recover, and the convoy made it out because you bought time with that rescue operation." The weight of what she'd done started to settle on Sophia's shoulders. She'd saved lives. That was what she'd joined the army to do, what she'd trained for, what she'd hoped to accomplish. But she'd also taken lives. Those militant fighters she'd shot, they were dead because of her actions. That was something she'd have to process and live with. A major from the medical corps approached and gestured for Sophia to follow him. "Specialist Turner, I need you to come with me for a debrief. The battalion commander wants a full report on the engagement, and we need to document your actions for the after-action review." The debriefing lasted 3 hours, with Sophia recounting every detail of the ambush, her treatment of casualties, and her combat actions. Multiple officers asked questions, clearly trying to understand how an ambulance driver with minimal combat experience had managed to perform at a level that exceeded many veteran combat soldiers. When it was finally over, the battalion commander, a lieutenant colonel with combat infantry badge and multiple deployment patches, looked at her with undisguised respect. "Specialist Turner, I'm recommending you for the Silver Star for valor in combat. What you did today went far beyond the call of duty. You saved multiple lives through courage and medical skill under fire." Sophia felt uncomfortable with the attention and the talk of awards. "Sir, I was just doing my job." "Your job is to drive an ambulance and treat casualties in secure areas. What you did was volunteer for combat, engage enemy forces, and conduct rescue operations under fire. That's not just doing your job. That's exceptional courage and initiative." Over the following days, word of Sophia's actions spread through the battalion. She became something of a legend, the ambulance driver who'd turned into a combat medic and fighter when the situation demanded it. Soldiers she'd never met would stop her to shake her hand or thank her for what she'd done. The casualties she'd treated all survived their wounds and returned to duty or were evacuated for further treatment. The gunner from the lead vehicle sent her a message saying she'd saved his life and that he'd be forever grateful. The soldiers from the disabled truck visited her to express their thanks for coming back when the convoy was withdrawing. Chen and Rodriguez, who'd felt guilty about being trapped in the distribution building while Sophia handled everything alone, began treating her with a level of respect that bordered on awe. They started asking her for advice on trauma treatment, recognizing that her experience under fire had taught her things that training alone couldn't convey. 3 weeks after the ambush, Sophia was reassigned from ambulance driving to a forward surgical team where her combat medical experience could be better utilized. She was also promoted to sergeant and given additional medical training to expand her capabilities. But the most significant change wasn't in her assignment or rank. It was in how she understood her role. She'd joined the Army thinking that saving lives would be straightforward, that it would involve medical treatment and nothing more complicated than bandages and medications. The ambush had taught her that sometimes saving lives required much more than that. Sometimes it required running through enemy fire to reach casualties. Sometimes it required fighting back against people trying to kill your patients. Sometimes it required making impossible choices about who to help first and how to help them. Sometimes it required becoming something more than just a medic, becoming a protector, a fighter, a leader who refused to abandon anyone who needed help. 6 months later, Sergeant Sophia Turner was treating casualties in a forward surgical facility when a young specialist was brought in with critical wounds. The soldier was frightened, in pain, and convinced he was going to die. Sophia worked on him with practiced efficiency, her hands steady, her voice calm, talking him through the treatment while stabilizing his injuries. "Am I going to make it, Sergeant?" the soldier asked, fear evident in his voice. Sophia looked him in the eye and spoke with absolute conviction. "Yes, you're going to make it. I've got you. You're going to be fine." And he was. Because Sophia Turner had learned something important during that ambush on the Eastern European road, that saving lives wasn't just about medical training or technical skills. It was about refusing to give up, refusing to leave anyone behind, and being willing to do whatever was necessary to protect the people who depended on you. She'd been just an ambulance driver, until 28 enemies attacked and the situation demanded she become something more. She'd grabbed a rifle and fought back. She'd treated critical casualties under fire. She'd refused to leave wounded soldiers behind. She'd done things she never imagined she'd have to do, discovered capabilities she didn't know she possessed, and learned that sometimes the most important medical treatment you can provide is simply refusing to let your patients die. Her father would have been proud. And Sophia Turner, former ambulance driver turned combat medic, finally understood what he'd meant when he said that the most important thing in emergency medicine was the willingness to go where the patients were, even when it was difficult or dangerous, especially when it was difficult or dangerous, because that's when they needed you most. Years later, when training new combat medics, Sophia would tell them about that day on the Eastern European road. She'd tell them about running through enemy fire, treating casualties under sustained attack, and fighting back when necessary to protect the wounded. She'd tell them that being a medic wasn't just about medical skills. It was about courage, determination, and an absolute refusal to abandon anyone who needed help. And she'd tell them that they were capable of more than they realized, that in the moment when it mattered most, they'd find strength and skill they didn't know they possessed, that their training would carry them through situations that seemed impossible, because she'd lived it. She'd been just an ambulance driver until 28 enemies attacked. Then she'd become everything her patients needed her to be. And in doing so, she'd saved 6 lives, earned the respect of every soldier who heard her story, and discovered exactly who she was capable of being when the situation demanded it. The wolf doesn't announce itself to the sheep. Sometimes it's just an ambulance driver, until the moment comes when the sheep need protecting. Then the wolf does what wolves do. And lives are saved because someone refused to give up, refused to run, and refused to let anyone be left behind. Thanks for watching. Every woman has a story worth telling. Join us to hear them all.